Mishmin Tuhis, Conrakat Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sarah's Roots. I come from Indian Canyon Nation. My mother is Tribal Elder Anne Marie Sayers, and I am a Mutsun Ohlone, California Indigenous relative. And it's so very important that we honor truth in history. I am a California native by ancestry of my matrilineal line, and to honor my ancestors, to honor my elders, to honor truth in history, I like to acknowledge Indigenous protocol, and ways we do that is acknowledging the land that we are on. So when I'm in the Bay Area, when I visit Yelamu, which is over in San Francisco, in the Ramaytush Ohlone territory, or when I visit Oakland, or what I like to say is Huchin, in the Chichenyo Ohlone territory, I always announce that I am a Mutsun Ohlone individual, or a Southern Ohlone, because Indian Canyon is right by Hollister. And Indian Canyon is the only federally recognized Indian country between Sonoma by Grayton Rancheria all the way down to Santa Barbara by San Ynez Res. That being said, we are not federally recognized as a tribe. But I am so very lucky to have been raised on the land of my ancestors, where my grandmother's grandmother's grandmothers have always been, and always will be. My ancestors have been tending the land. They've been stewards of the land since time immemorial. And I recognize my privilege, having been raised where my grandmother's grandmothers have always come from. My mother loves when I share a song, and part of our community, my mother and my grandmother have always taught me that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that, so I would like to offer a grandmother's song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and an all Mother Earth, for without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason, so it's with that humility, that gratitude, and that present-mindedness that we offer a song. This song came to me differently than it was taught, so I always say it's Canyon song, and it's important that we acknowledge where these songs come from, because some of the songs should only be shared in ceremony, or they should be only shared and taught to certain individuals or different communities, or sung at unique times. This song came to me differently, and when I connected with my mentors and when I prayed about it, I recognized that it is a song that can be recorded and it can be shared in intertribal and intercommunal spaces. So I recognize that it's good to be able to share. And culture sharing opportunities are so very important. So for those of you who are in or who come from San Francisco, you are in Yelamu. And the Ramaytush is the first language of the land. And for those of us who are in Huchin or in Oakland and Berkeley territory, you are in the Chichenyo Ohlone territory. The Chichenyo language is the first language of that land. This song is a Chumash song, and I am a California native, and I identify with my Mutsun ancestry. So I want to offer this song to you. And at the end of the song, sometimes when we want to let our prayers out or be in solidarity, we can say, "Oh!" So you are more than welcome to say, "Oh," when I do. So I'm going to use my regalia as an instrument, because our medicine or my necklace is not just a necklace, it's medicine. So, and it's a regalia because Native peoples do not wear costumes. I have a cat. Excuse me, no. Canyon's grandmother's song. Moi moi o kawana, moi moi o ka, moi moi no, moi moi o ko, moi moi o le ya ya kanale, moi 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 yo kawan, oh moi moi yo ko, moi moi no, moi moi yo ko, moi moi yo ne, yo ko le, moi moi yo ko le, moi moi yo kawan, oh moi moi yo ko. Moi moi no, moi moi yoko, moi moi yo ne, yo konale, moi moi yo konale. Oh, and no son, and a big oh, 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 oh. Thank you. Sorry about the light. So as I said, I come from Indian Canyon, and that's the land of my ancestors. And I was raised in a traditional and both in a culturally traditional and intertribal space where Indigenous protocol is part of our community's routine and culture. Now, when I say a protocol, it's a way of guidelines and a way of doing things. And Indigenous protocol, part of that is by recognizing the land that we are on. Because if we are not on the land of where our ancestors always come from, that means we are visitors, we are settlers, we are guests, we are people occupying space in other people's territories. And so it's so very important that we learn the history of these places and spaces in what I call today's post-colonial settler environment. And when we acknowledge Indigenous protocol, we want to learn about the history and the peoples. Sometimes it means we want to be in community with the peoples. And it's also a way of, acknowledging where we are. There's actually a protocol that we follow today. And it's a protocol of, if you needed to borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor and you needed to find out if it was possible, most of us, we've been taught not to just walk right into our neighbor's house and go right into their kitchen and take it. But we do something. And there is a practice. And I'm going to go. We're at the door and we knock on the door. We want to find out if those who are there are home. We want to find out if they consent about sharing their sugar, and then we might be able to get what we need. And so that's a protocol of practicing that kind of responsibility of who we are in community. We wouldn't just take or steal. So we're acknowledging that that's their house and that we want to visit and that we may need something. And so that's one practice. And so I, as a Native person, when I travel around the Bay Area, even though I have ancestors that have always been from this Bay Area, also recognize that my homeland is in Indian Canyon. And so when I visit other areas, I want to respect the original peoples and the ancestors of the land. And so in Huichin, there are 3 groups, 3 big communities that happen to be very active. And they are focusing on the work of their communities. And so I know about the Confederated Villages of Lashawn, and they have been working to get land back. They have been working with their community around language revitalization. They have been working to protect the shell mounds. If you've ever heard of the Shell Mound March or the Black Friday protest, Karina Gould is the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lashawn. And there are a few community gardens, and there's the Shumi land tax, is ways the community can actually offer funds to help the Indigenous peoples who have ancestors from that land get land back. Because in the Bay Area, the Ohlone people are landless. Here in the Bay Area, we use the word Ohlone to describe the community whose ancestors have always been from this place. In some books, you'll see Ohlone and you'll see the word Costanoan. And technically both of these are what we call misnomers. Costanoan is a word that got put in some documents, and it's what the Spaniards called us when they came in the early, or in the 1700s, and when they established the missions. And when they came to the coast, and they saw the indigenous peoples of the land, they said, Costaños, Costaños. And then when it got written, it turned into Costanoan. And the word Ohlone, we call this territory Ohlone territory, but the word Ohlone is a native word from the land over by San Gregorio. That's one village. But when it got written down by non-native people, and when it was written down and more people read about it and more people wrote about it, and when people cite their sources, more people started using it. And it's a little bit better than Costaños or Costanoan, so personally I identify as an Ohlone person. But there's no such thing as an Ohlone tribe, because Ohlone territory, it spans from San Francisco down to Monterey, all the way to the East Bay Hills, along the Mount Diablo mountain range. And it's like a territory. Like some of us say the Bay Area. Okay, where's the Bay Area? Is the Bay Area a one town or one county or many? And the same thing when it comes to Silicon Valley. Like, we're from the Silicon Valley, but some people live in San Francisco, and some people live in Sunnyvale, and some people live in Fremont. So the word Ohlone is just like a territory. Many native peoples who have been raised in their community and their culture, and many community members who are reconnecting to their culture, when they start to learn their language and reconnect to language and work in language revitalization, many of us recognize that sometimes the people just want to be called people in their language. There's also the Muwekma tribe, and the Muwekma tribe are a large community that are focused on their community efforts, and they're from the East Bay, and they have a lot of things that they are prioritizing, and they work on language revitalization, and they work with the community in education. And so it's important that we learn about these communities. And then there's a wonderful auntie, Ruth Orta, and her community, Himren. And I'm going to have to ask her the translation of Himren. I think it's family. Don't quote me. And her community is her family. And so these communities work on honoring truth and history. And they work on ways that we can make sure that, well, sometimes the mistakes of the past don't continue. We can honor truth and history by both recognizing our elders and our ancestors had ways of living on the land, in community with the environment, with nature, recognizing the rights of nature, and recognizing that we do not own the land, but we do have an obligation and we do have responsibility to have an accountable, humble, reciprocal relationship to where it is that we are. The same way that if we are, well, some of us are omnivores, some of us are vegetarian. However, you need to take a life to sustain your own. We need to acknowledge that we impact lives to sustain our own. And in time, our bodies go back to the earth. Well, today in the 21st century, I'm really sad about embalming. I would love more environmentally friendly burials where we can go back to the earth, where we can give back to the earth. I find that really beautiful because all of us are part of this circle of life. So in Huchin, there are 3 big communities, and it's important that we learn about them. And over in Yalamu in San Francisco, there is the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples. And there are times that we acknowledge the land. And it's important that we learn from the native peoples how we can honor truth in history. I am a proud Ohlone person, and I'm happy to offer land acknowledgement to our community. And I'm happy to share ways to honor truth in history just to help educate and reach out to our community and say there's so much that we can learn from indigenous pedagogies. There's so much we can learn from indigenous teachings. When you think about recycling or upcycling, are you familiar with that? Because indigenous peoples have been doing that since time immemorial. My family didn't hunt just to eat. My ancestors were not just hunter-gatherers. Do you really think that if we did not have our cell phones, we did not have PG&E or batteries or generators, or we did not have our vehicles or the internet, do you think we could live 5 days with none of those? Think about a month. If we had nothing, how would you stay warm? How would you navigate? Could you navigate with the stars? Could you touch the water and know about the ecology of that area? The sacred waters and their names and their words, the sacred mountains and the stories. To learn about the patterns of nature and of life. The Bay Area. I'm sad because we, in this area, my ancestors used to be salmon people. All of the rivers were abundant with fish. The skies would blacken with so many birds. Our community my ancestors have stewarded the land. They were land managers, environmentalists, historians, doctors. I don't really like that word, native shaman, because guess what? That word comes from another nation, and that's their word for their healers. And our community, we have our own words. And in some of our other communities, colonization has impacted our people so dramatically that some of the languages have gone dormant. Not many people have a chance to speak them. Languages aren't dead. It's important that we care about how we talk about them. But it's important to recognize that even when we say like shamanism, that's the community further away from us. Indigenous peoples have doctors. Indigenous peoples have healers. Why dismiss that? Why not call them what they are? So it's important that we acknowledge that some of the history books that have talked about indigenous peoples haven't always included the whole narrative, haven't always included respectful or culturally sensitive ways to talk about native peoples. Many outsiders looked at us and called us dirty because we had fur and feathers. Many outside communities looked at us and thought we were not. We were very primitive. But you know what I really think is primitive? People who are in the position of power, who make decisions that are so short-sighted that they hurt our earth. Think about the short-sighted decisions that are poisoning our waters. Think about the short decisions of creating products that only have one life. Single-serving items. Things that are going to trash, and where's that trash going? So who's primitive? The short-sighted people who are in the position of power. So if you are ever in the position of influence or power, where you impact your community, or you talk about history or the environment, think about how your actions and your words impact not only yourself, your community, but 7 generations in the future. So thank you for honoring truth in history. And again, I'm Canyon Coyote Woman, and I come from Indian Canyon. Lots of love.